Hello and welcome to Eldritch Extras. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
Yep, I'm good. So we should introduce ourselves. I'm Paul Fricker.
I'm Mike Mason, and this
together,
is Eldritch Extras.
It sure is. So this is the extra show we do alongside our fortnightly stories, and I think we're 5 stories in now.
Yeah, I have no idea. Actually, I'm not keeping count.
Possibly 4 stories in.
Yeah.
Yes. So what you been up to, Mike?
Well, I've been up to working and reading. I've got a few new books on the go. I've been started playing Diablo 4 with my son. We played through the last version of the game a few years back, and we cooperatively. So we downloaded a new one, and I've just started playing that one. Also, my son is watching for the first time Twin Peaks. So
what?
He'd already started the first series. So while he's been back with me for a few days, we watched the last 2 episodes of the end of the first season. So that's as far as he's got. And I checked whether he knew, knew more about the actual show.
Yes.
And no, he's got it all. It's all, new to him in that regard. So that'll be interesting to see, especially when we get to series 3 and Twin Peaks: The Return. So with all the wonders that provides.
Or indeed early on in season 2. I mean, I get it. I'm sure it's something people have probably heard of, but probably don't know much about, because I don't think it pervades modern culture very much. I mean, it's just like an old show because even like the new season 3 that came out, about 5 years ago now, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
It wasn't like massively popular, I don't think. I don't think it sort of reached, a massive audience. I don't really know, but it was fantastic. I mean, I think it's probably Lynch's, maybe his best work.
Well, possibly. I mean, it all comes down to, where your preferences fall, doesn't it? But I mean, it's interesting, the difference. I don't know if I mentioned this. I watched the documentary Lynch Oz, which is, I think it's on Prime or Netflix, one of them. And it's a documentary, but it's in several kind of chapters, like 5 or so chapters, and each chapter kind of is standalone, and it's a different, filmmaker or someone who's got an interest in Lynch, and really talking about their view on things, but it's all around the topic of Lynch's influence, how he's been influenced potentially by the Wizard of Oz film, because obviously there's a lot of stuff turns up in Lynch material that is a kind of direct parallel to the Wizard of Oz, like the red shoes and clicking heels. And
I mean, we definitely see that in Wild at Heart.
Wild at Heart is probably the most, but even in Mulholland Drive and many of the other pieces, and Twin Peaks as well. And so it kind of explores those kind of links, and there's various people. There's the Benson and Moorhead, who did the filmmakers who did Resolution and The Endless, and
fantastic.
That's quite interesting. John Waters, a filmmaker of such classics as Female Trouble and
Pink Flamingos,
which I made Hairspray.
I mean,
again, interesting kind of chap in and of himself. It's an interesting watch. It's you just sort of kind of come away with, because there's lots of clips of the Wizard of Oz and obviously Lynch stuff as well. But the Wizard of Oz stuff, you're kind of like, it's quite bizarre at times, isn't it?
So where is this documentary? Do you know?
It's on streaming. It's on it might be Channel 4 in the UK. It's just called Lynch/Oz, OZ.
I've got to see this.
And it's if you're into the kind of that kind of
I like Wizard of Oz. I like David Lynch.
Worth a look.
I like those people you mentioned as well. So Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Because I love watching Lynch talk about anything, but he never, and I love watching him talk about his movies too.
Yeah,
But he never really tells you too much about his films. He'll say, I don't know, he'll say like Eraserhead is my most spiritual film, and he'll say, Inland Empire is about a woman in trouble. That's about as far as he goes. And it's very much his ethos that it's up to you to interpret it, and to talk about it and understand it yourself.
There's a really great clip of it's a very short clip in the documentary of him being interviewed by Mark Kermode, the English film critic, and it's only it's like the little bit of the last of the conversation where Kermode sort of says something like, so that's what I suggest is an interpretation, and I know you don't normally comment on anything like that, but could you at least just give me a clue whether I'm kind of hot or cold,
right?
Kind of, in terms of the interpretation. And I can't remember what Lynch actually said, but basically on the lines of, no, you're completely wrong. Basically.
Oh, really?
Something like that. It's just a really short clip.
Oh, that's less. That's more specific an answer than I would have expected.
Yeah,
actually, a negative is sometimes as good as a positive. So, that'd be interesting then. So, yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
Because there was a YouTube, I watched a few years ago after season 3 came out, and we might have talked about this previously, but I think it's worth bringing to people's attention. It's a very long YouTube. It's about an hour and a half or something.
Oh, yes.
That has got a guy's interpretation and understanding of, I think, all of Twin Peaks. And
yeah. Right through all 3 series, isn't it? Yeah.
And a lot of it, when you take little bits of it, you're like, yeah, really. But when you listen to it and listen to his explanations, and he refers to sources of things that Lynch has said and the logic of it and where things have come from, it makes some very convincing arguments. Some really interesting arguments, which I've totally forgotten, but they were very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, again, I can't remember it all. I mean, it's like 3 or 4 hours long, isn't it?
It's huge.
And I seem to remember it's something, his theory is that it's the whole of Twin Peaks is really a kind of Lynch's response or illustration of the kind of the TV business or film business.
Yeah, and the effect of television, I think.
And so forth. But yeah,
it's
just even if the guy is completely off base with his interpretation, it's still fascinating to listen to.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of kind of things you're going to go, oh yeah, that sounds right, but whether it's true or not, who knows? But So I'm kind of like thinking it gives me an excuse to kind of I probably won't obviously see everything that my son watches in terms of in watching his way through series 2, but it kind of gives me a kind of an excuse to kind of maybe rewatch series 3 again. So which is probably due for a rewatch. I've only watched it the once when it came out. So
and that's some years ago now.
So it's a while back, and any chance to see Frogmoth.
Oh God, the Frogmoth. Well, and also, I mean, when I said I think it's his best work, apologies to people who aren't fans of Lynch, but this is what you get. It kind of reflects a lot of his other films. So I think there's quite a lot of Mulholland Drive in there. There's bits that sort of reminded me, when with the boxing glove and stuff, and the sort of characters in that one, it sort of reminded me quite a lot of Wild at Heart. And I think it's episode 8 or whatever it is, where it's about the Holocaust. Well, not about the Holocaust, but about the atomic bomb and so on. It's like that was very Eraserhead in the sort of tone and feel of it. It felt it felt like
it
always felt like Eraserhead. You couldn't turn the dial up anymore, but then he does.
Yeah.
It's
definitely it kind of brings together visually at very least, let alone thematically, a lot of these kind of pieces, as you say, from his film work. Yeah, it's interesting.
It always feels to me like you're watching a film sometimes or a TV show, and part of my brain sort of thinks, oh, wouldn't it be weird or strange if they did this thing, or if they just kept doing this thing? But they never do. But Lynch does.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, he can't carry on doing. Oh, he is carry on doing it. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds very banal and dull, but somehow he makes it effective. There's that one episode where you've got the guy sweeping up in the bar.
Yeah.
And I think he just carries on sweeping up for about
5 minutes,
7 minutes of screen time.
Yeah.
And part of me sort of feels like, am I just being a sucker here and just buying into this? But then again, I'm enjoying it, and I don't know why.
Yeah, but you look at, I mean, this happens a load in Lynch films where you've got the main kind of characters, and then to the side in the background, you've got some NPC, for the sake of wording, who just sat there, and then the camera kind of pans onto them or cuts onto them for a little while, and they have nothing to do with the main plot, but it just kind of captures their moment in time.
Yeah.
And it kind of pauses on it, and I don't know why, but it has this, it kind of has this effect, doesn't it? It kind of,
I mean, I know nothing about
life to some degree.
I know nothing about directing films, but I feel like he's a very good director, because when he puts the camera on someone, he seems to be able to get a lot out of them doing very little.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know how he does that, but I find
he
it
also
very
uses some really, really good actors. I mean, that helps, I guess.
I mean, you got Harry Dean Stanton and people like that. He's in the third series, isn't he? I think Harry Dean Stanton for a few episodes.
Yeah. He's not in a lot, but
one of his last roles.
I mean, the third series is really a collection of nearly everyone who's ever appeared in something Lynch has made is in series 3 of to some degree. Anyway, yeah.
Do you think you could make a game around Twin Peaks, or
I think people have tried, haven't they? There are games out there that haven't obviously licensed Twin Peaks or so forth, but they've emulated the feel or attempt to. I can't say I've looked at all of them closely to kind of say how successful they've been, but it's something that's always been on my mind in terms of that kind of, how do you emulate that in a game sense? Because I mean, Twin Peaks is possibly the bedrock for that in terms of all of kind of Lynch's work, because you have a clear defined setting, you have a clear kind of range of characters that you could bring into a game, and you have a clear kind of start point if you are just mirroring the actual series story with the death of Laura Palmer.
And it's an investigation.
And it's an investigation. So you've got the ingredients there to kind of form a game out of. Or you could just kind of have the game about different people in the community, and then because there's plenty of weird stuff around it, with the whole kind of Twin Peaks verse, the Black Lodge and the Buckhouse Boys and so forth. There's lots of groups and secret connections going on that you could use to fuel kind of some sort of drama. So I think it's doable. I think the trouble with trying to be Lynch in a game is that you are constantly looking for weirdness and try to kind of out weird things. And often, Lynch stuff can get quite weird, but a lot of it isn't, or it's very subtly weird, not in your face weird a lot of the time. And so there's a danger with a game where you kind of go overboard and it becomes kind of a kitchen sink of everything, and it's not actually doesn't feel like a Lynch kind of atmosphere in that sense, I guess. So I think that would be difficult to capture, like the scene in if you took, well, not Twin Peaks, but say Blue Velvet was the scene I was thinking of when Carl McLachlan finds the ear just out in a field or a park or something. That is super creepy and weird atmosphere. You could try and emulate that in a game, but I don't know. The trouble is we're emulating in a game. The only thing you can really emulate is the kind of the plot and the characters. But obviously in a Lynch production, the music plays such an important role.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
I mean, I think, if you try watching something by Lynch without the music, I think it's almost like a different film almost. And almost you kind of think if you're doing a tabletop game of it, you kind of almost need that soundtrack in a way to kind of, because that will help the tone and the mood, and certainly help the atmosphere of the game to kind of make it feel like lynching in that respect. But obviously that's not necessarily.
You're totally right. I mean, the music and the kind of soundscapes, which is often like wind and so on, that Lynch uses,
or the heavy industrial kind of sound as well.
It takes you into that place. I mean, there's a Twitter account called Sign Peaks, I think, which is like scenes from Seinfeld with Twin Peaks music put over top. It's fantastic.
I can imagine it just changes the entire tone.
Oh my god!
Yeah. Suddenly
I mean, you're right though. It totally changes it.
It suddenly becomes as this dark undercurrent, because that's what Lynch's music tends to do. It seems to kind of like push in this dark undercurrent. So even if it's a very light scene or normal scene, it's got this kind of foreboding kind of feeling about it. There's something about to happen, or something isn't quite right, and so forth. And you're trying to create that atmosphere at a gaming table without the music is a pretty tall order. It's like saying, every game of, every horror game, Call of Cthulhu or whatever, it's got to be really, really scary all the time. You can't do it. No horror film works like that. So
and other times he'll use like a crashing like rock track or something like that. But always to good effect. And I think using music in your games can be effective, but it's a lot to manage.
It is. I mean, it's interesting because I'm looking at some of the feedback we've had from other shows, and obviously at that point I should say, please, send in your feedback. We always like to get it. But Craig Coventry was talking about, suggesting topics we could explore, and this kind of starts to bleed into that one, because he was talking about approaches in terms of keeping things fresh for horror games, particularly with veteran players. And music is one way to kind of refresh things almost, because if you don't use music as a backdrop to your games, that can certainly potentially, give a fresh take to it. I don't know, what's your thought on, have you ever used music in a game, Paul?
Yes, I think one place that it worked well and easily was at the start of a regular campaign that we used to run. I think we used to do it for Ars Magica. I think we used to do it for a few different games. And we'd have like a theme tune. And that just, you just play it obviously just for a few minutes while you're giving out the character sheets. And then, you'd stop the music and you'd start the game. And it was a good way of kind of communicating or getting people in the right headspace, and also signaling, right, we're starting now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of music on a TV show, isn't it? You hear the music, it all comes back to you. You've got the feel, you've got the emotions, and that's the point of it. So if you can choose a good track, whatever that might be, it might be instrumental, it might be, a popular track, whatever it is, it just kind of captures the feel. I think I used something from, anyway, I can't remember it's escaping my memory what it was, but we did try a few times to use tracks in particularly dramatic scenes. I remember one friend used Kamina Burana, or however you say it, in like a Lord of the Rings battle scene in using MERP.
Awesome.
To great effect. That was pretty awesome. And then sometimes when we were playing, I remember when we used to play Cult with Scott, we'd have just a kind of a compilation of kind of industrial kind of music in the background. And that kind of gave an eerie feel sometimes, because it was just a compilation. Sometimes it would feel like it was clashing a bit with what we were doing, but often I think it just lent an atmosphere. I wasn't familiar with the tracks particularly, so they didn't take me out of the game. But I think that is one danger that can happen using music. What about yourself? Have you used music in gaming much?
From time to time with a home group. I haven't used it in online gaming because I'm not sure whether it's. I just feel it might intrude too much online, and but around the table I've used. I purposefully avoid anything with singing, people speaking in it, because I just find that too distracting for me, let alone the players. So it always tends to be kind of either the kind of classic stuff if I was running Call of Cthulhu, then if it's a 20s and maybe play some kind of jazz music, that kind of period kind of pieces, just to kind of, again, more earlier in the games when it's kind of setting the scenes and the players are going around those kind of places where they might hear it on the radio or in a bar or whatever. And I've used those kind of things. But I tend to use more kind of, what we'd call soundscapes, and basically get two. One's kind of a normal play, and it's just a bit of background kind of setting the mood, really. And then find something a little kind of darker, more sinister, and tend to kind of play that towards the end of a game, or when, the big bad's about to appear or something's happening. And then, because then I've only got 2 tracks to worry about, because that's the other thing.
Yeah.
When you introduce music, it's yet another job for the GM to manage.
Absolutely.
And so, and it's really easy, just get everything all lined up and then just forget to use it because you're concentrating on the game.
Or you press the wrong track and it.
Or it
totally breaks
there are
the
some, mood. In modern times, there are some better facilities for that. There are, things that you can, one tap will do it, and you can set it all up and it will just play through kind of stuff, and some really good kind of specifically for RPG kind of resources for that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I find though, when you get to the end of the tape and you have to turn it over, that sometimes breaks the mood as well.
I just get up and turn the album over. But yeah, no, I mean that, as I think is sometimes quite effective. It all comes down to finding the right piece for the right game in a way, and I do think if I was to give it, try out a kind of a Lynchian style game, I would definitely try and find or use. I mean, I already own a lot of the Lynch soundtracks from his movies because I like them. So I purposely use some of those to try and engender that kind of Lynchian atmosphere in the game. That's certainly what I do. What about, I'm just away from music, thinking of Craig's point about keeping things fresh, horror fresh for veteran players. Is there any things that jump to your mind?
Horror fresh sounds like some sort of cleaning product strap.
Fresh, frying tonight.
Horror fresh. Other things to keep games fresh. I mean, I'm still on the music track in my head. I'm just thinking, like, for Full Fathom 5, my Whaling Ship one, I did use sea sounds for that, and that was something you could just keep rolling in the background because you knew they were going to be on the ship the whole game, so you can just get the waves and the seagulls or whatever in the background. So that's kind of an easy one to do. Other things to keep the game fresh, I don't know. I mean, just not using old stereotypes, I guess. Trying to avoid I mean, I think if you've got an interesting game and interesting characters and so on, you can have the same old story again if it's done in an interesting way. And when I say the same old story, I mean the fact that you got certain elements in there. So let's say it could be in Innsmouth, it could be with Deep Ones, and that could be very cliched and stereotyped, and we've seen it all before. Or if it's done interestingly, then it could still be great fun and very engaging. And that's the crux of the question, I suppose, is how do you do that? How do you make it interesting? And I suppose I don't really have an easy answer to that. I think you just have to look at it and think, well, does that excite my imagination, or does that just bore me as a reader?
I mean, one thought that comes to my mind is that there's a lot of scenarios, and veteran players will have played a lot of scenarios that are very much the kind of monster of the week or haunted house of the week kind of thing, one shot kind of style scenarios where it's very much about you are entering into the situation, and there's a bit of risk when you're stood in the haunted house because you might get hit by a thing or the monster might come up through the floorboards, but it's not a personal, you're not invested personally in the same way unless it's your house and you actually live there. So there's a lot of scenarios where you are brought in, or you end up in the plot, but you're not intrinsically connected to the plot other than as an investigator. what would be cool is to, having done those kind of style of games, or even with the same characters, is look for ways to now to ingrain them into the plot, so making the plot personal to the characters, so therefore they're not now observers and investigators to the horror, they are the center point of it. And because obviously that works really well in the kind of campaign sense, because they've spent all these years investigating the mythos, as a kind of to remove almost, and had some close encounters and all the rest of it. However, now we're dealing with the after effects of what latched onto them, or what have they kind of taken in unwittingly or wittingly, the books they've read, the spells they've learned, the encounters they've had, how has that affected them, and what in terms of the mythos is kind of now keeping an eye on them and kind of wants them almost. It's kind of like is and so kind of making the plot personal to them kind of refreshes the horror, because it's now about them. It's not about the haunted house. It's about them, and it kind of uses the kind of a similar plot to the film it follows. Wherever they go, it will follow them. Whatever they do, it will follow them. It will get to them. It's like being chased by a hound of Niblos. It will get to them. I've got somebody at the door, so I've got to go and answer that. Hang on a minute.
Okay, so these ones, we're not editing these, so that's like a golden rule, that we're not going to edit these for like half an hour or so. So Mike's gone to answer the door. So I will say, I think it's, as I talked about last time with that Stephen King book, I think a lot of it is about making characters you care about. Because he really made me, or characters I'm interested in, I think. Hello, Mike.
Hello.
Was it
I
something
got
important?
a package. Unfortunately, it wasn't for me.
Well, that's no good, is it?
So
I was just saying, like that Stephen King book I was talking about last time, I think he really gave me some interesting characters that I was interested in and sort of came to, I guess I would say, care about. Paints enough of a picture that you feel you relate to them and you feel like you care about them. So I think that's one thing, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily essential, because you've either got, I think, one of two things. I think you've either got characters that you're really invested in and you're really interested in, and that's often the case with, if you follow any kind of soap opera, I think that's what happens, isn't it? And the actual plot lines and stories don't have to be that interesting, but if you're really invested in the characters, then you become interested in the minutiae of their life. Or you've got a really interesting, whatever you call it, plot setup, mystery, whatever that might be. And really, the characters, you can even not like the characters and it's still great. Like for me, I mean, I would say big monster movie in New York with the thing that crashed into the Cloverfield. Like the characters,
with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it,
yeah, he's in everything, isn't he? But it's like, I don't think I was really invested in the characters in that film, and to be honest, they're kind of unlikable almost, a bit like Blair Witch Project. The characters in there, they're not particularly likable. You kind of relate to who they are to some degree, but you're not particularly rooting for them. But what's happening, the mystery of what's happening, and or not mystery, with Cloverfield, the action that's happening is so compelling that I can imagine myself in that situation. I don't have to relate to the characters, I think, but I can imagine. I suppose that's something. I either relate to the characters very strongly, or I relate to the situation very strongly, and I can totally relate to being lost in the woods, or to being stuck in the city with some disaster happening. That's never happened to me, but can imagine it.
I'm thinking of a film that kind of brings both those together in equal measures, and
Brilliant.
That's probably why it's a really great film. Is Jaws, just to mention Jaws again, because you've got a great plot in terms of I'm just talking about the second half of the film. You're on a boat.
Okay.
There's a monster out there. Yeah. That's kind of cool, because at any point it's gonna appear and you're gonna have to kind of fight it and deal with it. So that's kind of cool. So you're invested in just what's going to happen next in terms of the plot. But you've also got some really cool characters. I mean, particularly Quint, who's who's a great character to kind of you become invested in
Yeah.
him and his tales and his view on things. And it
all
reels you
three are
in.
great,
So you've
right?
got two things reeling you in, as well as Hooper and Brody or whatever. But and so I think in terms of gaming, if you've got a good plot, a good kind of you've got the equivalent of Jaws is out there, and you've got to deal with it. That's cool, okay, but introduce some really interesting NPCs who are working with the PCs, or at least neutral, that actually allow you to kind of change the pace and tone from time to time. So you can kind of have that. You can have the scene where Quint's talking about the Indianapolis in some sort of parallel way that you've got in your game, where you've got this old timer talking about back in the summer of 1873. There was that thing happened, and then you get a chance to kind of explore some past and do it rather than a handout. It comes through, a dialogue, and the whole intention to draw the players further into the plot and make it interesting. And often making the plot bigger than what's going on now is a great way to make that investment more, because it's not just that meteorite that fell last night we're dealing with something that keeps repeating. It's what that wonderful episode of the X-Files does really well. The Tombs one, where they're dealing with the stretchy man.
Oh God, yeah.
And in and of itself, that's great story, interesting. You want to see what happens. He's an interesting character.
Yeah.
But what makes it better is the fact that he has to do it every so many years, and you have that character of the old retired police officer who never could solve the case but knew it was wrong, and he talks about the horror that he encountered with Tombs back in the day.
Yeah.
And it just adds this other whole layer on top of it, which makes it more compelling. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, I think.
Yeah. It's to Craig's question, it's a very difficult one to answer in a nutshell, isn't it? How do you keep the game fresh for experienced players? And all these things we said, I think are good. I think for me, if I were to try and put it in a nutshell, I think it's your job, and not just your job as keeper, but your job as player to the other players as well. It's to just try and spark people's imagination. It's about if something inspires my imagination, and that can be me imagining there's a monster outside the door, or there's some sort of mystery and I want to try and figure what it is, or that I'm imagining shapes in the dark, or I'm in the boat and that something might be coming to attack us. I think that's part of the fun of role-playing games to me, really, is that imagination and that kind of shared experience of imagining and making up a story.
Yeah, part of that, depending on your relationship with your players to some degree, is to maybe have that conversation outside of game and talk about, okay, we've played a lot of these scenarios and we've done these kind of things, and we played through masks and all that kind of thing. What were the coolest bits for you, or what's the story that we haven't told yet? And it might be something that links back to an early story. Remember the time we were doing that investigation and there was that cult, and and actually we that was a bit of a sidetrack, and we went and did the main plot. We never really followed up on that cult. I always kind of really wanted to know what they were up to. And so you kind of using the players to kind of spin some kind of ideas for you, and kind of say, well, actually, yeah, we could go back and, some time's passed. What's that cult actually up to now? And so the players are kind of directing where their attention they want to go. And in that way freshens it up, because, they're not just waiting for you to deliver a plot this week. They're following up on a plot of their own design almost.
And chances are that they'll come up with things that maybe you've forgotten or didn't seem very important to you at the time, but for some reason, it kind of sparked something in their head, and they were like, "Oh, that was a really good bit." And you're like, "Well, that was just dull." But what?
They look over the character sheet, and 5 years ago, one of them wrote down, strange gem that they picked up in some random scenario. that you always meant to kind of do something with, but forgot about, and they forgot about it was on the character sheet, and then you go, actually, yeah, strange gem, right? Let's now use that and do something with it, And again, you're building plots that are potentially more personal to the characters and the player's memory. So, hopefully they are, become more invested because of that.
And I think it's improvising off that framework of a scenario you've got, either one you've created or one that you're using from a published scenario, and being willing to, you don't have to, like, when I say improvise, doesn't mean make everything up from scratch. But if you can just improvise a little bit around that framework, sometimes those are the best bits.
Well, I mean, you could take a published scenario, which is, let's just call it a haunted house scenario, where you've got a family, let's say. They're all NPCs in the way it's written because the players are coming in as investigators. But I mean, you can improvise in that way of saying, okay, all the characters, all these NPCs are going to become the PCs, and the players will develop, they get together and work out who's living in this house, whether it's a kind of like the family in the original or some kind of variation on it, and just have the stuff happening to them. There's no investigators in this game. They are the people in the scene. It's happening to them. What are they going to do? And it might be they ring up their the players' other investigators to come and help them. I don't know, but that's all possible. And it suddenly created a really interesting dynamic, because suddenly now their investigators are actually NPCs being run by the keeper, who's basing it on how the players have played them, and it changes the game around a bit. It makes it kind of fun and a little different,
Yeah, I mean, essentially, this question is like, how do I make interesting stories?
Yeah,
and man, that's quite a difficult
if we had the
question.
answer to
let us know. Hopefully the published materials give you interesting situations and interesting stuff to work with, and you can build on that. But yeah,
no, absolutely,
a perennial question, really.
It is, it is, but it's a good question, and so thanks, Craig, for sending that in. And if you're listening and watching, and you've got a question similar about gaming, or you want to talk more about Jaws, whatever it may be, then do drop us a note to our email, which is Paul.
Do we have an email?
We got an email, haven't we? EldritchStories.com. Is that the email as well?
Well, we got a website.
We've got a website. You can get the email on there, or you can just post to the website, can't you?
Yeah.
You see, we're very technical and proficient on.
Yeah, we're sounding very professional here. Yeah. So we've got the website EldritchStories.com. You can come over and subscribe there, or you can find the show on all the places you might find your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And we're also on YouTube, where you can watch us doing the Eldritch Extras, should you so wish.
So there you go. So come and watch, come and listen, and send us your feedback or ideas. It's always good to hear them. So thanks for that. And is there anything else, Paul, today, or are we at our allotted time?
I think we're about there. Yeah,
we're about there. Okay. Well, if that's the case, then what have we got to tell everyone?
I think we've got one more thing to remind people.
Yeah,
I think you can tell them, Mike.
Is it me today? Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay, well, in that case, look forward to seeing you all later. But in the meantime, keep it Eldritch.